Perfect. Do a little countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Doug, how are you? Thanks so much for joining us on the Meat Mafia podcast.
Hey, I'm really good, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to talk to you. I know that Clemens and I were talking before this. We're another example of the awesome connections that we've gotten to forge on Twitter. It's funny because I think we've only known each other for about 2 months. You reached out after I had posted one of my threads, but we've hung out a few times in San Diego, and I've personally learned a ton about just the low carb movement and Low Carb USA. So we're excited to have a great conversation with you.
Oh, awesome.
And sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, I feel like I remember watching Fat Fiction yesterday and seeing Doug on there, and so I'm personally excited for this one, just knowing that you're one of the movers in the space and really representing low carb. So I'm excited for this.
Yeah, no, that's a whole story on its own. We can maybe talk about it a bit later if you want.
Yeah, the one thing I do remember is you had the I Love Bacon shirt. Then when you were running in that documentary, we need to get our hands on a couple of those shirts too.
That's easy. Just go to our website and like one of the menu options there says swag, and you can order the sweatshirts and the t-shirts and whatever you want.
Do you guys even make those in a size small, or are they only large and XL?
No, they go from small to, I suppose, XXL. I think is the biggest one.
Love it.
So yeah, the whole range.
Love it. Yeah, we'll definitely have to dig into that. But one of the striking things in that documentary is they talk about the fact that you've done over 100 marathons, ultra marathons, races. And you have a really interesting way of telling your story about how you were carb loading for these races and you didn't feel great. I think you were having different types of GI distress, and then you stumbled upon this low carb approach. It's pretty much changed your life. So I think to kick it off, we'd love to just, learn a little bit more about your background and how you ultimately got into low carb and, how that led you to where you are today.
Okay. Yeah. So like you mentioned, if people are familiar with road racing, and South Africa has this ultra marathon called the Comrades Marathon, which is like a cult there. On the day of the race, it's not a matter of if you're going to watch it, it's a matter of where you're going to watch it, whose house you're going to be at. And it's normally it's a 12-hour race. So people get up like really early in the morning, watch the start, get the barbecue out and whip up some breakfast. And then a bit later in the day, the beers come out, and it's sort of a whole thing. 90 kilometers or about 55 miles is about the distance. And, I wasn't competitive, but I was pretty decent runner. I mean, in a field of 14,000, I finished in the top 100, and I came in 98. It was like the best finish I've had. I was still an hour and a half behind the winner, but there was only 97 odd people ahead of me, in that space. And then the people come in more and more, sort of the whole thing concertina. So in the last hour, you get like half the field end up finishing. It's actually quite fascinating. And I thought I was bulletproof. I used to run an enormous amount of miles and could eat anything and did eat anything I wanted. And at the time, didn't even realize I was doing anything wrong, because we were taught as runners that carbs are king, right? That you have to have carbs. You can't run without carbs. And so I was eating, all the stuff that I was eating was sugar and carbs, and then thought I was doing the right thing. And I used to get, I trained really hard, man, and I used to get really, really fit before these races. And my whole year was geared towards training for this race once a year. And I every time I would get up on the day of the race and feel like absolute crap. And in retrospect now, I thought I was just nervous. I thought that I would, I'd put all my eggs in this basket and I was like just psyching myself out of it. But I kind of realized now that I was suffering from carb toxicity. You know, I'd followed, I mean, Tim Noakes was my hero at the time. Well, he still is, but, you know, now I've got to meet him and everything like that. But back then, he'd written this book called The Law of Running, and it was considered around the world, actually, like the runner's Bible. And he taught us how to run on carbs and how to carb load the 3 days before. And that you know, South Africa is a big meat eating country and stuff, so braais or barbecues, you call it here, we had a lot of meat and stuff. I didn't necessarily eat a lot of vegetables and stuff, but then I was closer to the race trying to eat more and more pasta. And for 3 days before, I would just eat pasta and rice and potatoes and all of that stuff to try and supposedly up my glycogen stores, right? And all that happened was that by the time I got on the day of the race, I would be standing there looking up this mountain thinking I've got to run 55 miles up there, and I can't even get to the corner. And it was just, it was devastating. And I was fit enough that I muscled my way through it, but always felt like I left so much out there on the road that I could have done so much better if I didn't feel like that right from the start, you know. And then as I got older, I moved out here and to the States, and I came, you know, I was continuing to try and run, but I was putting on weight. And as much as I tried to keep running it off, I couldn't anymore. And there was a couple of pounds each year that were kind of creeping on. And I stood on the scale at one stage, and I was like 35 pounds overweight, over what my kind of weight used to be like, and it was always be within a couple of pounds, like right through the year, the same. And so I just, at that time, it was weird. I got an email from a friend of mine who was trying to sell me exogenous ketones. And it said something about ketones, an alternative source of fuel to glucose. And it just came at the right time when I just stepped on the scale a few days before and was pretty devastated about what shape I was getting into. My knees were really sore. I was battling to run. I was hating life, you know. But I didn't even know what a ketone was. I was 51 at that stage, I think, and I'd never heard of a ketone. I think people that are more involved with diabetes and stuff like that are, you know, more exposed to that kind of information, but I didn't even know what a ketone was. And so I went and did a bunch of research and learned all about this whole concept of ketosis and how your metabolism changes and you start sort of prioritizing the burning of fat, or the, you know, so there's two things. It oxidizes fat directly in the mitochondria, and it also converts fat to ketones, which are then also used to produce energy, supposedly better for the brain and blah, blah, blah. And after 3 weeks, I decided, okay, this makes sense. It kind of explains everything that I've been going through. Because, you know, what the experiences I had back when I was really fit and I was racing, and then, you know, 2 or 30 years later, what I was just by aging, you know, and thinking that I was just getting really old, and that this was just how it was. And so anyway, I tried it. The company had just started. They didn't even have these exogenous ketones anyway, but I had learned so much about it. I thought, why don't I just do the diet instead, you know? And so I took Pam shopping, which she was like horrified, like, Doug's actually going shopping, like, what's up with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I even had a list, which horrified her even more. But I, you know, we ended up, you guys know what it's like, right? You end up walking around the outside of the store, right? Because that's where all the real food is. And buying steaks but ribeye steaks as opposed to lean fillet or something like that I used to cut like every tiny little bit of fat that I could find off the steak before I even cooked it, you know. And so now I went outside and cooked these 2 ribeye steaks, and I brought them back inside. I cooked them on a fire outside. I brought them inside, and they were like, there was like this steak on there with all this fat in there on there, and there was even some fat like slushing around on the bottom of the plate. And I that was my very first keto meal, right? And I literally started giggling, like hysterically, like as seriously am I going to eat this?
Yeah.
It went against everything I believed in, you know, but I had learned enough in the last 3 weeks that I believed that this was something that made sense and it was worth trying. And so I literally had to gag this steak down because that my brain was so programmed against fat that it created almost like a gag reflex.
Wow.
But as I kind of got it down, after a while, I started to think this actually tastes pretty good.
Yeah.
And by the time I got to the end of it, it was like, this is brilliant, you know. If this is going to be the what I need to eat to do this lifestyle, then I'm in for it, you know. It was amazing, and it kind of just went from there, you know. I used to have this tub of what they called malt balls, which was like a honeycomb type sweet sugary candy thing that was surrounded in chocolate, and these little like you know individual balls, and they were awesome. I had this big bowl next to my chair where I used to sit in the evenings and watch TV. We always had a big bag of M&Ms around, and Pam and I used to pour this stuff out and like sort out all the colors and that, and she preferred this color. But we ate, it was hideous. And I thought that I would really struggle with that, you know. But now that we were allowed to add fat back into our lives, and the food was just so much tastier, and I got back in the kitchen. Before she couldn't get me in the kitchen. Now Pam couldn't get me out of the kitchen. You know, I even used to kick her out sometimes. And I started cooking and looking forward to it, and everything just was so exciting. And so I never ever thought back and thought, oh, I can't have this beautiful pasta. It was like, the thing that tasted good with the pasta was the sauce that you put on the pasta, right? And most of the time, the sauces that we're making were meat-based and whatever, and you just take some of the ingredients out, like maybe added sugar and stuff like that, and then you just eat that, and you don't eat the pasta. And so I never pined for it, and I had very, very little tolerance for people who told me that this was hard or difficult to maintain. And I used to say, that's just like rubbish, you know. There's all the food that you can eat now is so much nicer than the food that you're telling me that you're not allowed to eat anymore, or not able to eat anymore.
Even around some of your races as well, you still found it easy?
Well, so I by that stage, I wasn't really, definitely not racing that kind of those ultra distances and that anymore.
Okay.
But I was trying to run, and what happened was that within the first couple of weeks, I went through the whole total keto flu thing like badly, because back then we didn't know anything, and I'm convinced that if I had known just to add a whole lot more salt to what I was eating over those, especially that transition phase in the first couple of weeks, that I would have had a much easier time of it. But I didn't know any better at the time. And so I really suffered with hypos a lot, you know, like I would be sitting at my desk and I would stand up and it would like the room would start spinning. And I would have to like literally hold onto the desk and like steady myself for a few seconds before I could actually start walking. And when I found out about it, I remember going and pouring like probably half a teaspoon of salt into the palm of my hand and just like throwing it down and chasing it down with some water. And literally from that day onwards, I haven't had problems with night cramps, with hypos, with anything anymore. And there was just an ignorance, a lack of knowledge about it at that time. But what was also happening was that we were doing martial arts at the time, and I would, instead of doing 4, because we had to travel quite a long way to the studio, instead of doing 4 workouts a week, I would do 2 days, and we would just do back-to-back double, basically, just do one class and go immediately into the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And get home at sort of 8 o'clock at night and crawl, like be really, really tired, go to bed and get up in the morning and feel like decrepit, and like crawl to the restroom and like sit in the toilet and think, oh my God, I'm getting old. Mm-hmm. Within two or say 3 weeks at least, after I started this, I was jumping up in the morning without any of those effects anymore. And I would literally just get dressed and go out for a run. There was no way 3 weeks before that I would have sat in that toilet and thought, okay, let's go for a run now. It just wasn't going to happen. Sorry?
So I was going to say, it's literally life-changing to actually be able to pop out of bed and have the energy to want to go train and want to go.
Yeah, it was, I often say, like, I didn't have diabetes or something like that, or I wasn't morbidly obese or anything like that. And some of the people that have had these monumental turnarounds in their lives and in terms of real health things, I think I never got tested. So I'm pretty sure that I was pre-diabetic, at least at that stage. Mm-hmm. If you had to look at my A1C and all of that, but I never had any blood tests taken or anything, so I don't know that for sure. But I'm knowing now what I know and knowing what I was eating then, I'm pretty certain that my A1C was definitely up there. But it was just, now everything changed. Respiratory issues, like, my nose would always be like the sinuses would be swollen, so I wasn't able to breathe easily through my nose, and so at night I would breathe through my mouth. Felt like someone had died in there the next day when I woke up. A lot of snoring and all of that stuff all went away as well. All of these things that I didn't start doing this to have these changes happen. Mm-hmm. And yet they all just did. And it was just the most phenomenal thing. And that was how 6 months later, the 35 pounds had come off. I was back to the same weight that I used to be when I was running these ultra marathons and stuff. And it was my birthday, and we were out with a bunch of work colleagues, and it had become that whole thing. The first rule about keto is don't talk about keto.
Yeah.
Because people are just sick of hearing it, because the thing is that your life changes so drastically that you can't help but want to tell everybody about it. And so, but we had learned at work to stop talking about it because people were just sick of it. And so, but once they'd all left, Pam and I were sitting on our own. And so obviously then we start talking about it again. And I started to say, there's these little conferences around the country, maybe 1 or 2 that with 100 people or so, teaching people about this lifestyle and this diet. And I was pounding my fist. I was saying, we need to put 1,000 people in the room. Let's why don't we try and do something in San Diego? Summer, people will come to San Diego because it's summer. Let's try that. And so I literally the next day got up and started contacting some of the people that I'd seen on YouTube and whatever that were presenting at these other conferences, and asking them if they would come to, if I did start one in San Diego, would they come? And one of the first people I got hold of was Jimmy Moore, and he was actually really helpful. Put me in touch with a bunch of other potential speakers, and they all wrote back almost immediately and said, "Sure, if you do this, we'll come." But the big one was Gary Taubes, I looked up on his website, and where it said contact me or contact us or whatever. I wrote in there and like said, like, this is what I want to do. I'd like to have you as a speaker. And he got back to me, and we went backwards and forwards via email. And then eventually he asked if we could have a phone call. And we had this discussion. We talked for an hour on the phone. And I was aware of the fact of how much he charges to do a talk for an hour, right? And so this made me really nervous. But like, and I tease him when I introduce him and bring him up onto the stage now, is like it was like I'd asked to marry his daughter. It was like this inquisition. And he told me afterwards, he said, I've been invited to places where they've paid my fee, but there was like a handful of people in the audience. And I just wanted to get a feel for whether I felt like you would actually get more than a handful of people in the room. And at the end of it, he said, sure, if you do this, I'll come and speak. And Pam was I had it on speaker, and she was standing down the passageway, like listening. And I put down the phone and I looked at her and I said, like, shit, like, this is for real now,
Because he's the guy, he's the legend in the space.
Yeah, and especially, yeah. I mean, a lot more newer faces have come on board, the Brian Lenskes and Tro Kalajians and the Low Carb MD, and those, Brian got converted at one of our events. Back then, none of those people existed, and Gary was definitely one of the icons. He still is, but there's just more icons now than there used to be. So yeah, I mean, we went from, so I started the first pretty much February 1. And we put it on at the end of July, and I had to establish a website, establish a social media presence, find, settle on the speakers that I were going to have, negotiate the contracts with the hotel, and we knew absolutely nothing about that. And it cost us a lot. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot since then, since that first one. I tell you, like, frightening.
Doug, sorry, yeah. Were you still working a corporate job? We were at the time.
Those same people that didn't want us to talk about keto at my birthday. But it got to about March or April in that year, and it just got to a point where I knew if I wanted to do this, it was I couldn't do both. And it kind of wasn't that difficult, because I was the VP of operations in a almost like a startup company, and Pam and I had both been working for them for 2 years, and we hadn't been paid. And so it was like, okay, well, look, something else has come up that at the time I thought we put 1,000 people in the room, we'll actually make some money and be able to feed ourselves. But it turned out to be a whole lot more difficult than that. But we believed in it. And so we basically gave notice and said, we can't do this other job anymore. So, and since then it's been that's pretty much all we've been doing. But for years it was, we got ourselves in such a huge hole in that first event, that it's still taking us, we're still climbing out of that hole, but we are slowly getting to a point where we do a little bit better than break even on the event, and so that the excess money is able to pay off, because we've been living in this debt hole, right? And we just, as we start collect entrance fees and stuff, we just keep paying that debt down. And then come to the event and we get all the bills from the hotel and the IT guys and everything, and we just max out the credit cards again, and that's kind of how we've been operating.
Mm-hmm.
But it has been so worth it. It has just been the most amazing ride, and the most rewarding thing. I don't believe anybody else could do in much that's as rewarding as this. It's you get to see how you help to change so many people's lives, that and real people that are really sick. Like I wasn't really sick, but so you have people like me who have monumental changes, and these people that are really sick that you literally save their lives, by providing them the information that they can use to fix what's going on with them.
It's a very empowering mission, and an awesome story. I'm curious, do you have the number or an estimate of how many people have showed up to Low Carb USA events?
I haven't, in total, I haven't. I think we did our 15th or 16th in-person event in Boca in January. Wow. And then we did the 2 virtual ones during COVID. So we did the San Diego one was obviously canceled, and so we replaced it with a virtual event, and then Boca in the January as well. We've had 600 people at that's the best we've had at a San Diego event. Mm-hmm. We had 800 on the virtual live stream one that we did. But we still we still haven't put 1,000 people in the room, but we're working on it. We've got a huge campaign, actually just is in the process of being printed and sent out in the next week or so. That's costing a bunch of money that we're hoping is going to put more bums in seats. And Ken Berry has spoken a couple of times, but he spoke again in Boca in January, and we were talking afterwards, and he's kind of committed to help sort of utilize his huge following that he has to try and help us get more bums in seats as well. So we'll see. I said to him, like, we want to put 1,000 people in the room. So he said, okay, well, let's do it. Mm-hmm. And he's that's one of the things that he's really good at is reaching people and showing them that this is something that they need to get involved with. So hopefully, in spite of COVID, remnants of COVID that are still around, people are still scared to travel. But then there's other people that are determined to travel. They are so sick of not being able to get out of the house that they live to be able to come to an event like this. So I
think the good news is there's this interesting correlation between people that are into the lower carb carnivore approach and also a little bit looser with COVID and want to get back to normalcy, I think. So hopefully by August, the end of August, when you have this event, there will be a good coalition of people and to break that 1,000 person number. But the interesting thing about this event and your approach, I remember we were talking about this at dinner the other night, you're trying to get a lot of doctors to attend the event, right? To actually have people that are trained with MDs and Western medicine to embrace this approach. And we talk about this all the time. With someone that's battled colitis, I would pay a lot of money to have a GI that is an advocate of a lower carb approach that could interpret my diet for me, help interpret my blood work, et cetera. That's an advocate of this. So that's what excites us about the event in August.
Yeah, and when I was talking about this big push that we're doing right now is literally advertising to and sending mailers to thousands of family medicine doctors to try and, because we focus on that. We'd like the hardcore keto people to come and join us. Most of those people know enough about it that they can listen to any CME credit worthy talk, and they know as much, if not more, a lot of them than the doctors do. Mm-hmm. But that's not and a lot of those people have become great friends of ours. But that's not who we're focusing on. We want to focus on the medical practitioner who is going to, because for every one of those people that we can train, and hopefully some of them will come just wanting to come and learn, and we can convert them, like Brian.
Mm-hmm.
And then what ripple effect that has. I mean, look at Brian Lenskes. I mean, he came in 2017, kind of been trying it on himself with some success, but there's no way he was going to be talking to his patients about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then he came and he saw all these internationally renowned speakers and doctors and scientists and talking and thinking, wow, this is like really legit. You know, this is not just some fad thing that he'd read about and was trying himself on the side. And so, you know, he started telling people about it afterwards. And I think I told Brett this story about, you know, he reached out to me about 5 months later. And we ended up, I had never even met him at the conference. But he told me, like, in 20 odd years that he'd been in practice, he'd never ever seen or had a patient come off insulin.
Wow.
In almost every case, it just keeps increasing over time, right? As they become sicker and sicker. In 5 months, he had 11 patients come off insulin. And he said, Doug, I didn't take them off insulin. They took themselves off insulin. I just helped them understand how they needed to change their lifestyle in order to do that. And he kind of did that unofficially, right? Because he would only, if people said to me, hey, you're looking so good, you know, what are you doing? And he said, okay, I'm going to tell you. And if you want to try this, I will help you understand how to do it.
Wow.
Started putting resources together and everything. And he started trying to find people. He reached out to Jason Fung all on his own and Trochalasion. They started the Low Carb MD podcast. Within a year, I think they had already hit 1 million downloads. So just with him, the number of people that we've been able to have exposed to this, just because of having that one guy come and learn at our conference. If nothing else ever came out of it, just that, it would have been totally worthwhile, all this effort.
It's incredible. We were texting with Dr. Brian last week, and we just asked him, how many patients have you gotten off of insulin that were type 2 diabetic? And he said, literally too many to count, dozens and dozens of patients. And
yeah,
that's what we say. We say, look, we're not trying to be dogmatic about the diet, but what other approach is actually getting diabetics off medication, getting people that have anxiety and depression off their antidepressants? It's this stuff is literally life-changing. I know one of the things that you told us when you're running these events, the number of husbands, wives, spouses that come up and thank you and Pam for saying, like, you literally basically gave my husband or wife their life back, and they're just so much more pleasant to be around. Like,
that's the big thing. Yeah, it's like thanks for helping make them a better person or something. I've heard that regularly. Yeah,
but it has that transcendent effect where you realize that you can change your health with the way you eat, and then, you know, it turns into this domino effect where what else can I do just through these small changes? I think that there's something really powerful there.
Yeah. And we're learning more and more. I think that the whole mental health and neurological field is one of the newer ones to really, for people to start realizing that there's so much benefit for, you know, in those fields. You know, when I first started doing this, people would talk about, oh, we've got better cognitive clarity and stuff like that. Cognitive functions better. But no one was really talking about real changes for real neurological problems and real mental health things. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Chris Palmer. He's spoken at a couple of our events as well, but he did I think it was the first Boca one we did before COVID. And he during his talk, he told the story about some lady with debilitating schizophrenia, like, and how, you know, and the thing with those kinds of conditions is it's really, really important to control the meds properly and the titration of those meds and that kind of stuff in order to make sure that these people don't go off the rails or whatever. But if properly monitored and managed, it can help so many of these people. And he told the story of how this lady's life had changed, and literally had all of us in tears. It was like he kind of finished his talk up with that, and I kind of went up onto the stage to sort of kick off the Q&A for it, and I couldn't speak properly because I was so choked up with just that anecdote, that story of how he'd managed to help this lady literally take her life back. And so, yeah, we're learning more and more about that. It's amazing.
What is your, because I was curious about this, because obviously we both had anecdotal experiences. The three of us have incredible success with a low carb approach. Someone might look at my story with the colitis and say, oh, that's just anecdotal. I'm sure you get this all the time. What is your response to someone that's saying, oh, there's not enough scientific data or research around a lower carb diet, it's just anecdotal experience? Do you typically have a response to that?
Well, first of all, there is a lot of research being done, more so in this field of nutrition than any other, by orders of magnitude. Like there's that much more. And, the other response is like, and so do you have any data supporting the current SAD diet? Right? And there is like zero, right? There's absolutely no evidence or science around what's currently being portrayed as the healthy diet. And yet they start pointing fingers at us and saying, you don't have science. And that's, first of all, that's not true. The other side of it is that N equals 1 becomes N equals many, which I think is what's triggered a lot of the research that has gone on, because people have seen all of these improvements and thought, well, okay, it at least warrants some kind of research to understand whether it's this or whether maybe it's some other environmental situation that changes when you do this diet that actually results in the improvements. But if that's the case, we need to learn about it and so that we know. In the end, when there's guys like Dr. Robert Sivas, I mean, he's got thousands and thousands of documented clinical situations that he can show you. Eric Westman's the same. Like, he's been doing this for 20, 30 years. Thousands and thousands of documented, clinically documented, and those are not anecdotes. Those are clinical cases that we can show. And although there's no trial, randomized control trial or something that shows us, what it does show is that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people that respond positively to this. It costs nothing. There's no danger to it. So why the hell wouldn't you try it?
Yes.
And honestly, if you do it properly, and that's always a difficulty because people don't know enough about it, and we didn't know how to do it properly in the beginning. We kind of stumbled our way through it. But if you could take someone and literally feed them for 2 or 3 weeks maximum, and tell them, you do this, you stick with this for 3 weeks, and if you honestly do not see any improvements or changes in those 3 weeks, then you can go back to your sad situation if you want to. None of them will be able to honestly say there hasn't been any changes, and especially in diabetes and stuff. I mean, most of the time, except for people that are really, really sick initially, they're off their meds within 3 weeks.
It's incredible.
And that's the caveat here. Anybody listening to this is not medical advice, right? But go to a doctor, and guys like Dr. Brian Lenskes and a lot of these people that are part of our provider list that we have and with the SMHP that we can talk about later, a lot of them do online consulting and stuff, and you can get doctors to oversee this and make sure that because the thing is with that is that your medications become very dangerous. If you really do go and start cutting all the carbs out of your life, suddenly everything starts changing. And all of these things that you're taking medications to try and control aren't there anymore. So now you're becoming over-controlled. And so it's very important that that a doctor monitors that and makes sure that they get you off the medications at the right rate, because it can be dangerous. And it's just so amazing that people can honestly, for the most part, get off their medications in a very short time. Mm-hmm. So that's my response. First of all, there is a lot of science, a lot more than anything else. There's no science to back the current diet, and there's, the anecdotes are not n equals 1, it's n equals hundreds of thousands. And that warrants a second look, I think.
Mm-hmm. Doug, it seems like the community element of this low carb USA movement and kind of just like the carnivore movement is really a key element that you can share the experience with other people, like who've done it before, and lean into that. And I think there's something there that most people don't understand. So showing up to an event like yours, you get to meet other people who are trying to make the same change. Have you seen that come to life?
That's so so when I did the first event in San Diego, I mean, I was just spinning like a top, and we were just trying to keep everything on the rails and get through that time. It was still only 3 days, but just to get through the 3 days relatively unscathed was really difficult. But then we went down and we did one in Florida about 6 months later, and it was a much smaller event. Our expo and the registration was like right outside the hall where the IT guys were busy setting up for the next day or whatever. And I was sitting off to the side of the registration table with my laptop just working. And Pam and some of the others were registering the early arrivals who had come in the day before. And this one girl, she literally was she started crying. And as I said, because I wasn't spinning so much anymore, I was actually able to look up and smell the roses kind of thing, and so I started listening to this conversation, and she was saying, "Yeah, no, I shouldn't even be here, and I'm supposed to be a health coach, but look at me, I haven't managed to lose all the weight that I need to lose. How can I go and be teaching other people?" And Pam and Jean would just convincing her, "Now listen, man, just stick around and come and listen and learn." And we just watched her grow through those 3 days, and how, we were talking to her on the Sunday afterwards, and she was in tears again, but saying it's just, my family were on me all the time. My doctors wanted to fire me. Everybody was hating on me about trying to do this to improve my life. Mm-hmm. But now I come here and suddenly nobody's judging me, and everybody wants to help. And even doctors and people that want to listen to my problems and give me advice on how I can tweak things or whatever to make it better. She was just so motivated by the time she left that weekend. And it became apparent to us that even more than the general public type attendee, like she was the doctors and the practitioners themselves. Mm. And over the next 6 months or so, I started to learn more about how badly they were treated within their own communities, and how ostracized they were. Where, guys were literally being refused attendance at their governing body meetings, and and I think Rob Cybus was one of them back in the day. I mean, he sort of stumbled on this or found out about him through himself being really heavy and obese, really, was that then he found this, and he was working with his patients and being so successful at it. And he would go to the obesity medicine conferences and try and speak up about it and tell people about this experience, and like, hey guys, we should maybe investigate this further. And they just pounded him. And to the point where he basically withdrew into his shell and just stopped talking. And he would go to those meetings and listen, because a lot of the times for CMEs and that he had to attend, but he didn't want to offer his experiences anymore, because he just got crucified for it. And for him now, few years, he's become very involved with us over the last few years, and now it's exciting for him because people are actually listening now, and he's able to get acknowledged for the work that he's done and the stuff that he has to teach. But even then, he's still in the minority, in huge minority, in terms of the other doctors, in his field. And that's in any field, any doctor, any medical field. And so for them to have a place where they can come and present their findings and be well accepted, and to be able to sit at dinner and have discussions with other colleagues and doctors and stuff about issues that they may be having, or be able to discuss patients that they're struggling to help or whatever, and being able to solicit advice from other doctors and medical folks, that's like really special for them. And I think they appreciate this community that we've been at pains to develop over time, more so than anybody. So that is one of our main focuses, is to try and provide an environment and a home, a safe place for people to be.
Yep. I was just going to say, I got that from an event where, it was a nutrition meetup, and felt very similarly. That was kind of my takeaway, was there was a lot of people who showed up who were individually doing themselves. They were getting the work done themselves, but having other people to share their story with and their experience, I think just brought them to a whole another level of understanding about how they can improve their health, and that there's a support system out there of people who are thinking similarly about their health. So I think the community element to what you're doing is amazing. And I think it's really powerful.
No, I agree. I think it's so important.
Especially too, you can't discount the power of having other people that are maybe even working an office job. Because to your point, that's the hardest part. Like you said, people don't necessarily want to hear you talk about keto, or there's a temptation of happy hours or pizza for lunches or donuts brought into the office. And it's difficult to have the willpower to say no by yourself. So even just to have that community through the Low Carb USA, to just share tactics and understandings and things that have maybe worked well in the office, it's just so powerful to have that community. Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing, when you say, like, because you're being ostracized at work or pressured at work or whatever, you don't have anybody to talk to, where now you can come into our, Facebook group, and there's so many out there now that people can find the community and the group that works best for them. But they can go in there and they can say, listen, these people at work are doing this, blah, blah, blah. And people will respond back and give them ideas about how they could how they can fight that, and how they can avoid succumbing to the pressure. And that's so important for the people that are struggling, like on the edge of being able to stay on the rails. Having that support could be the difference between them being able to continue it and get healthy, or stay sick and possibly, in a lot of cases, die. And that's a very real thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Doug, one of the things we wanted to ask you, just to take the conversation back to you personally, you've tinkered with low carb and been in the low carb space for about a decade. For you now, what does kind of an ideal day of eating look like that makes you operate and feel you're at your best?
So yeah, not quite a decade, maybe 6 years, but
close enough.
But still. I think when we first started doing this, I think it's still so foreign, and you believe that where you're going to get your nutrients from. You have to have vegetables for nutrients, right? So now you learn about all the low carb vegetables, and we focused so much on making sure that every meal had at least one and probably a number of these vegetables, but it's broccoli and spinach and kale and a few others of these low carb vegetables. So obviously no root vegetables, carrots are kind of in the middle, but there are no potatoes and sweet potatoes and stuff like that. What were we talking about? So
the foods that have kind of worked best for you over the years.
You're all right. Yeah. So sorry. So I feel like, and I know that I was eating more vegetables when we first started doing this than I'd ever been eating before, right? The only thing was I didn't eat a lot of vegetables, but I ate a lot of sugar and a lot of pasta and rice and potatoes and that sort of stuff. So that was what was keeping me going, but now I was replacing that with spinach and kale and broccoli. But over the years of reading a lot, obviously, listening to some of the speakers who spoke at our events, start to talk about the anti-nutrients in a lot of these vegetables and oxalates and stuff like that. And then you start to learn about all the nutrients that really are in the animal products. And you start to realize that they are there in spades in the animal products. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but they're also much more bioavailable, right? So even if some vegetables have certain minerals and whatever that you maybe are looking for, but if you can't absorb them, it doesn't matter how much of that stuff is eaten. If you can't absorb them, then it's pointless. Mm-hmm. And then you learn more and more about the animal products, and they've got more of everything you need, and it's more bioavailable. And so, and then just at that time, the carnivore trend started to pick up. The carnivore movement. Mm-hmm. More and more people were realizing the same thing, right? And I didn't make a decision to go carnivore. I just started to realize that from everything I'd learned, I felt like I didn't have to eat these vegetables. Mm-hmm. And so I just started eating less and less. And so I'm not a carnivore now. I didn't declare myself a carnivore, but I eat predominantly animal products, right? Pam makes this really amazing shrimp dish sometimes, and then that has some broccoli and spinach and stuff in it. And if she makes it, it's delicious, and I'll eat it. But we do it maybe 3-4 times a year at the most, mm-hmm. Right? She was literally, in fact, I think she's probably gone out now. She's gone out to the farmer's market. because she's hoping that there's certain reed and one of the other types of avocados are hopefully going to be back in season again. You know, I classify avocados as an animal product. That's just yeah. If I'll eat as much avocado as there is availability. So yeah, ketovores is a term I've heard thrown about, like literally just animal based, but not fixated on it.
Yeah.
And you know, and if I do have something like some vegetation, as I call it, then just make sure it's not the high carb variety, you know, and stick to the ones that we know are at least going to keep our you know, that have low glycemic index or whatever, different ways of describing it.
Doug, I'm curious, what's your interpretation of alcohol consumption with the low carb movement, or what have you heard from some of the doctors who come to some of the events? Because I know that's kind of that's a sticking point for a lot of people.
Yeah. So I think it's for people that are starting out, it's probably not a bad thing to exclude it if you're able to. But once you kind of are properly adapted and stuff, you know, I think it's very individual, and I think that the jury's still out about this with a lot of people. You know, that there's a talk about Craig and Marie Emmerich talk about this a lot, about prioritization, right? And so if you have alcohol, that's like gets prioritized first. So it will get processed before anything else. And so if weight loss especially is your main aim, then if you take that out of the equation, then it's going to start processing this other stuff. And hopefully what's happening is that if like the ketogenic diets, I've heard people describe it as it's very low on carbs, you know, sufficient amount of protein, and then the rest is fat. And they use the term I've heard used is like use fat as the lever or the lever, and so that's how you throttle it. And if you need to lose a lot of weight, then you basically throttle back on the fat that you consume. And so you basically, because you're now in this state of ketosis, you're mobilizing the fat out of the fat cells, and you're able to actually burn it for energy, right? Convert it into ketones, oxidize it directly in the mitochondria, and so you're literally burning your fat reserves down. And when you get to a stage where you're approaching your ideal weight, then you kind of start pushing the lever back again, and you start introducing more fats into your diet. And I don't think I answered your question there. I think I got off on a sidetrack there, but I think that's very important for people to understand that that is where the control is. So we were talking about alcohol. So I think some people, like with alcoholics, like certain people can't have alcohol. I think from a nutritional standpoint, there are certain people that can't, because it has, their body responds in a certain way, and just they literally will put on weight, can't lose weight, whatever. But I think for the majority of people, alcohol in and of itself, as long as it's not, you know, taken to extremes, is not necessarily a bad thing. What often is what comes with it, right? So you've got the mixers and the you know, gin and tonic, and the tonic is just like, I really learned that fairly recently, is like tonic has probably got more sugar in it than Coke, which is fascinating, right? But you can get diet tonic now that doesn't have sugar in it. And so have a gin and tonic, but gin and diet tonic, right? I've drink vodka now and again, and I used to drink it with other stuff, and now I just drink it neat. And, you know, pour out a couple of shots into a glass and sip on it through the evening, and that's fine. And then with wine, especially in America, the wines have so much sugar in them and so many additives that are just toxic. And but we came across an organization that basically sources naturally made wines, where they use the old methods of they don't put any additives into it. The grapes are grown naturally, so they don't even irrigate. They're called dry farm, which means that they're not irrigated, and irrigating, which makes the roots tunnel deeper down to try and find the moisture that they need. It changes the character of the fruit, the grapes themselves, lowers the sugar levels in the grapes themselves, and then you make the wine, and then you ferment it to completion, so that there's no residual sugar left, because that's what the fermentation is, the sugar reacting with the yeast.
Right.
So if the fermentation stops and finishes, then there's no sugar left. It's all been burnt off, right? And so there are actually an amazing number of little small estates around the world that still produce wine like this. And so they go around and they source them, and then they have a wine club that you can subscribe to, and get these wines delivered, and made a huge difference to a lot of people who really love to have a glass of wine at dinner, and hated the fact that now if they embraced this new lifestyle, that they weren't going to be able to do that. And now they can go back to that and do it, right? They can have their glass of wine. And so yeah, I think you need to make sure that whatever you're drinking doesn't have sugar in it. But then also, you know, you need to be aware of the fact that some people just can't.
Right.
And if you're one of those people, you need to be honest with yourself, and it might not be just from an alcoholic type point of view, but just nutritionally, your body maybe just cannot handle alcohol, and if that's the case, you need to stay away from it. But there's no way that there's a hard and fast rule that you want to do keto, you can't have alcohol. That's not true.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned dry farms, because when I first started doing keto, that was the first, I cut out alcohol altogether for, 2 months. And then I reintroduced it with dry farm wines.
Dry farm wine, yeah.
My thing is, it's more about like the next day for me. Like I want to be able to get up and get after it, have a good workout, get a good night's sleep. And what I realized with dry farm was I was still able to wake up that next day, still able to enjoy like a glass or two of wine, but also next day still feel fresh, just because it doesn't have preservative. So yeah, it's a great product.
Yeah, and and I think learning from them, I became aware of the fact that there are 72 or 76 additives that can be added to wine in this country.
Wow.
That do not have to be specified on the label.
76, that's incredible.
Yeah, and and they like in these especially the stainless steel vats and that they use, and then they have this process, and there's this huge amount of foam on the top of the barrel. Now, to do it properly, you need to sit and wait for a couple of weeks for that foam to dissipate before you start bottling it. They just spray this chemical in there that's like an anti-foam agent that basically defoams it in minutes, and then they start bottling, because that means that they can use the vat again it adds another 2 weeks on each cycle to their process. Just one chemical that they're spraying into this wine in order to commercialize the production of it. And there are just so many that, and that, between that and the sugar that's still in the wine, that's what gives you the hangover and the horrible feeling the next day. You take that out of the equation. Yeah. And, I've been known to drink at least a bottle of that dry farm wines in a night and on a particular occasion or whatever. And I still get up the next day and I feel fine.
Right.
There's no way in hell I could drink a bottle of commercial wine here and feel anything but shocking the next day.
Well, you've got to have a good glass of wine with those South African barbecues.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's. But I very rarely drink a whole bottle. But every now and then, an occasions kind of come along where that's happened, and yet I've still felt fine the next day.
It's so interesting. It makes you wonder, like, is it just the sugar that's giving people the hangover, the effect for them to feel poor the next day? And you've also, it seems like you've been really intentional about finding the alcohol that works with you and helps you fit your goals. But at the same time, you think that for a lot of people, it would be incredibly helpful to just cut out alcohol cold turkey for a month or two, just to see how that feels, partly just like an act of solidarity. And also just most people don't know their default is to have a few drinks a week, and they don't understand the way that impairs.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like the elimination diet, the way carnivore can be an elimination diet. I think it's the same thing. I think it's a good thing to, if if you're not able to, then it means you actually have a different alcohol problem. But you should be able to, and if you abstain, like I'd say at least a month and possibly more, and see what happens, and especially if you're just starting out, then you can make sure that your body gets properly adapted, and because you got to learn as you go along about what you can and can't have, and you're going to slip and make mistakes. And so after a couple of months, now most of us are pretty sort of settled and becoming pretty well adapted. And at that stage, if you want to, then start going and adding some of the stuff back in. Have a couple of glasses of dry farm wines, or some really good natural low sugar or zero sugar wine, or some alcohol without some sugar additives and mixes and stuff, and try it and see. But be honest with yourself. If you start to see some kind of regression or backpedaling or something going on, then say, okay, well, maybe I need to accept that maybe this is only something that I have on a special occasion when we've got guests around or something like that. When we don't, it's not an everyday thing because it's not good for me. Some people, I feel like it could be, especially in moderation, it can be possibly even good for you. There's a guy, he's actually a South African guy as well, as a neurologist in Florida. He's going to be speaking in Boca next year, and he talks about how there may be like a medical, medically it can be shown that some small amount of alcohol can actually be beneficial. But again, it's everybody's different, and you have to assess it honestly. And for most of us, that means that we can participate to a reasonable extent, but some people not.
Yeah, I think the fact that not all alcohols are created equal is a really good point. One of the things that you mentioned that I think is important too is with those 76 additives. I think I read recently that there's a seed oil component of the process that actually helps reduce the foam. So it's like you don't even really know what those preservatives and other things that are getting added in are. And there are these massive industrialized processes, especially if you're doing it on a large scale, to help reduce foam and make it taste different or make it a certain color. So I think that those are like obviously very small things that are to be considered when you're, picking your alcohol, but they're definitely important because they do have some sort of factor on how you feel.
Yeah, I think that the additives are a big deal. Yeah. I think they have a lot to do with how you process it and how you feel the next day. Mm-hmm. I think the sugar too, but I've got no proof of it, but my opinion is that those additives have a lot to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Doug, one of the things we wanted to ask you too, because we don't want to take up too much of your time, but we know you have the big San Diego low carb event coming up towards the end of August, which we'll link to in our bio and our show notes. What would you say to someone that's interested in attending that's never been to a Low Carb USA event that's listening to this? What can they expect to get out of that experience for the few days that they attend?
So an enormous amount of knowledge is one thing. Mm-hmm. But that's, you could listen to a virtual event and hear the same talks. And so maybe acquire the same amount of knowledge, but it's more about the personal interactions and being able to sit at the dinner table with Ken Berry or Dr. Robert Cyrus or Brian Lenskes or Tro or any of these amazing doctors and scientists, and I've left the dining room. Dinner starts at 7:30 or something. I've left at 10 o'clock to go to bed because I've got to get up for the next day's event, and there's still tables of people like deep in conversation. Mm-hmm. There's no other place where you're ever gonna get a chance to sit and speak with Steve Finney for 4 hours at the dinner table. There just isn't another situation where you'll ever be able to do that, and that opportunity is priceless. Mm-hmm. Apart from even if you're sitting at a table where one of these speakers is not sitting, there's almost always going to be somebody who knows a lot more than you do, and the conversations that come out, a lot of it based on what they've just heard during the day in the lectures. And so the conversations that go on afterwards often help you to understand better what you heard or clear up some of the confusions that you might have had, or the where you didn't quite understand something, and you were able to now talk about it in an environment where people will help you to understand that. Apart from the connections that you end up making and the friends that you end up making, there's and it happened back in Boca. I remember a number of people coming to me and saying, like, I just found a lifelong friend here. Wow. Somebody that they just, especially we were talking about earlier, where you don't have people that really understand what you're trying to do, and so they judge you. So now you find someone that obviously everybody there is not going to judge you, but then on top of that, you end up having an opportunity to spend a couple of evenings with these people, and by the end of it, you think, man, you know what? This is like my missing soulmate, Mm-hmm. And there are so many lifelong friendships that we know of that have come out of being there, and just feeling like you're being a part of change. The sort of slogan that I've adopted for our events over the last couple of years has been, what starts here changes the world. I took it from a talk that Admiral McCraven did at a commencement speech for University of Texas. But it was just such a powerful statement to me, and so I kind of focus on that all the way through the event. You know, that what you learn here and what you get inspired to go and do from here, you're not going to get that inspiration from watching it on the live stream, or and if you're not able to be there in person, that is a great second best. But for the people that are there, by the time they leave there, and you see the people, the whole community change through the weekend. You know, and my very last, you know, when I'm kind of my closing talk at the end, and I say to people, so, you know, who here enjoyed themselves, you know, and like the whole room like just puts their hand up. It's like, it's an intangible thing that by the end of the weekend, you feel like this has been such an amazing experience. It's a combination of the people you've met and how cool those people are, and how many contacts you've made and how much you've learned, and how hopefully inspired you are to go out, and whether you're just a member of the public and you're just going to go home and hopefully try and teach some of your friends and family about it, or whether you're a practitioner, a health coach, a doctor, you're going to go out and try to help more people. Like you've seen with Brian, you know, he helped 11 people in 5 months. Now so many he can't even count. And in 20 years before that, he didn't have one single person come off insulin. I mean, that's what we wanted. We want people to leave there inspired to go out and do their part to change the world and make it a better place.
Yeah, it seems like the cost of a ticket for the Low Carb USA events, it's truly an investment in your metabolic health, and this intangible thing of being in person with this amazing community. We talk about this a lot, where it's been amazing just getting on Twitter and getting to connect with people virtually. But part of the reason why we're so excited about going to the August event is it's going to let us be in a room with 1,000 other like-minded people that are all trying to better themselves through this low carb, ketovore, whatever you want to call it, approach, and just be able to really build off of each other. So, I mean, you know, we honestly just wanted to thank you for being such a leader in the space. We've both personally learned a ton from you. You know, we're looking forward to just becoming better friends, hopefully join you for the Meat Fest in San Diego too at some point, which we'd love to get an invitation to. But just wanted to thank you so much for coming on, and we've really enjoyed this conversation. Would honestly love to have you back on at some point too, Doug.
Well, let me know when you're both going to be in San Diego. Maybe we'll arrange a Meat Fest for that weekend while you're there. That's got nothing to do with Low Carb USA. That's just got to do with enjoying meat with friends.
Any reason to get together and eat meat. That's a good
one. Exactly. So yeah, I just wanted to go back to the whole fat fiction thing, because when Jenny and Tom came out here to film the stuff they did with Dr. Brian Lenskes, I was actually in Australia visiting my family, and Brian was writing to me and saying, there's this person called Jenny Eisenhart, and she wants to come and interview me for some documentary or something. Do you know anything about her or whatever, you know? And I had heard about them and on what the project that they were working on. So I said to him, I'm like, it sounds like they're pretty legit, and I would definitely, you know, see what they want from you. And it ended up being quite a big part of the movie. But I wasn't there. It was during that time that we were finalizing our clinical guidelines, the document that Adele Height helped us put together. And we were about to publish it. And so when I got back, I phoned them and I said, listen, like, you guys need to come back to San Diego, because I don't care about it being on there or anything, but we need to have something about these guidelines in this movie, because it's really important to the message that and it should be a part of this message that you're trying to convey. And they said, basically they funded the whole thing themselves, and they were out of money, and they were and so I basically used my Marriott rewards points to get a plane ticket and a hotel in Boise, in Idaho, where they are based. And I flew out there, and I ended up spending the day with them, filming and just hanging out. That's amazing people. And the more they talked to me, and a lot of it was on camera, I was like, okay, dude, like we've got to put this in the movie. And then like Tom said, okay, like, because where they live was like right near some mountains with trails and that. So he found a couple of his, because it was a weekend, and he found a couple of people from his film crew, and they came out there, and we got in a van and we drove out into the mountains, and that's where we did that film, me running up and down the trails there. Mm-hmm. And none of that was planned before we went there. It kind of just evolved. And so then we published that, but on the Low Carb USA site, and it was, it got a lot of people looking at it and whatever. And we tried to sort of create this concept of a professional community, a professional environment, and so we were charging people to become a part of this professional organization, because I knew that people needed a place where they could come and have conversations and stuff as practitioners. And it just never really got traction. The Low Carb USA was not the right place for it. And over a bit of time and a lot of talk with Trocal Agent and stuff, we eventually decided that we needed to have a non-profit umbrella organization for practitioners who are open to what Adele coined the term therapeutic carbohydrate reduction. Well, carbohydrate reduction is a therapeutic intervention, depending on how you want to phrase it. And so that's how we came to, I put a board of directors together with some amazing people like Eric Westman and Tro himself, since he got me started on this, and Mark Cucuzella, again, a couple of other just amazing people. And we created the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. Mm. And once we had that, it was a perfect place to now migrate the clinical guidelines to its new home. Like now it's had a real home. And we've created credentialing and accreditation pathways. So for instance, you can do it just by doing training, and there's a whole lot of training opportunities and things that we identify that people can go to. And if they submit to that training, then we consider them properly educated about this whole concept of therapeutic carbohydrate reduction. And yeah, we've got, it's taken off really well. We've got a couple of thousand people now on our mailing list. We've got probably 400 or 500 new members now, and already it's only been going for like a year now, but we've got like 40 people who have gone through the training or the certification process, and they are now accredited. They can use the credentials MHP behind their names, metabolic health practitioners, and so now they can go and and practice with confidence.
Mm.
Because the most important thing about the standard of care is that what it says is that it's the consensus amongst a community of practitioners in a particular environment with similar training.
Mm-hmm.
So now if we have this bunch of practitioners who now all part of this organization, they're all talking on the forums, and they've submitted to this training or shown that they have the competence to teach people about this. But this now starts to establish standard of care around carbohydrate reduction, and to the point where it'll stand up in court, because now we have a huge community of doctors and practitioners who the judge could poll and say, and you say, like, people's metabolisms when they restrict carbohydrates is different,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the same standard of care that applies to other people who eat carbs is not, we shouldn't be held to the same standard, right? We should be, there's a different standard that applies to us. And so now practitioners have more confidence, because I know there's a lot of them out there who, in the beginning, I used to say, how can these people not see it? They look at this evidence and it's so obvious, but it's not recognized as standard of care.
Mm.
So they still, it's a very litigious society, right? So they are very concerned about advising a patient to do this, and then what happens if he dies of a heart attack or something, and then his family want to sue me for telling him to go low carb or something.
Mm.
That's the kind of thing that these people who look at it and believe the science but are not prepared to tell their patients about it because it's not considered standard of care. And so now this organization's purpose for being there is to help establish this concept as an alternative. We're not telling everybody that they're right or wrong. I don't want to get into wars about that. But if you feel that this is something that is going to be beneficial to you or beneficial to your patients, that here's a place where you can be part of a community that all believe that, and that will give, that consensus is going to give you support and protection should you ever need it. So.
Well, eventually it seems like that body of work from your accreditation will speak for itself over time with this current state of metabolic health in the West.
You would hope so.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing it, because we believe that we hope that that's going to be the case eventually. But
yeah.
As I said, we have enough people on board now that if it came down to it, we could show in court that there was a consensus there.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It solves that exact problem that we were talking about earlier in the conversation, right? Whether you're looking for a GI or a general health practitioner, someone that has knowledge and insight that's an accredited doctor, but also has insight into this low carb space, you're basically building that tribe and a directory for the average consumer to be able to find a medical practitioner that's
right.
What they want.
There is a provider list there as well, which we also launched initially on Low Carb USA, and also didn't get the traction that we were hoping for there, because it just wasn't the right place for it. So now we've got a provider list there where people can add, anybody can go and add themselves to that list. But they need to become members, and they need to go through the accreditation process if they want to. And they're, got a really beautiful bright orange badge that shows that they're accredited in their profile if they are. And they can obviously use the credentials, but they can only do that if they become members, and they participate in the forums, and they participate in the whole community. And but there's a couple of thousand, maybe at least, I need to go back and look at the number, but there's a ton. You can, the search engine is actually really good, and people can go in and search by state or by zip code, doctor's name if they know it, specialties, like, you know, if they're looking for someone just to diabetes, just with PCOS or whatever the condition is that they are looking for help with. And they can get a list of doctors. And what's one good thing that's come out of COVID is that it's enabled a lot more online stuff. Like in the beginning, before COVID, it was very difficult to talk to anybody outside of your own state, where you know, in terms of licensing and stuff. But with COVID going on, that kind of got relaxed quite substantially. And now maybe eventually they'll revert back to the way it used to be. But right now, people are able to find doctors to, you know, so if they can't find someone in their own city, they can find someone that will consult with them online who does know about it. And then there's certain, Tro is one of them, Tro Kalayjian. Philip Ovadia was spoken in Boca for us as well, heart surgeon. He's they on a mission to get licensed in every state in the country. And I mean, I think both of them are like up in I think maybe as high as 40 states that they're actually licensed in now, which is a huge mission.
Amazing.
Apart from the cost, just the admin involved in getting that done is monumental. But they see the need, you know, that, and looking to, I think Philip, apart from his actual surgical stuff, he's looking to spend most of his time helping people across the country now, because he's licensed in so many states. Tro is the same. And I know there's others, but maybe there are others that have that many licenses, but those are the only two I know of. But there's others that are licensed in multiple states, you know, 3 or 4 maybe, that can help people if they can't find someone in their own city or own zip code area or whatever. So if you don't find someone close by, don't despair. There's still help. You know, you just have to go and find one of the others that consults remotely and get help that way.
Doug, where's the best place for people to find you? Is it the Low Carb USA website?
Yeah, either the Low Carb USA, that's lowcarbusa.org, the smhp.org, on both. Twitter, so Twitter is Low Carb USA or Dougie Reynolds. Facebook is Low Carb USA. What's the other one? LinkedIn is Low Carb USA. Instagram as well, Low Carb USA. So yeah, that's the best way. Low Carb USA, that's the best way to find me, I think.
Love it. Well, we'll link to all those in the show notes too, and also provide a link to the upcoming San Diego event in August, which we're both excited to be able to go to.
Yeah, no, that'll be great. I look forward to seeing you guys there. Although I look forward to seeing you guys here to eat some meat before that.
Yeah, we'll be there sooner.
Okay, good.
Clemens is a strapping young lad, so you're gonna have to buy a little bit extra. He's 6'4", 220, so
yeah, got
some big appetites here.
No, there's never gonna be. We're never gonna run out. Yeah, there's always plenty for people to take home, and a few days worth of leftovers for us as well. So,
perfect. Well, thank you so much again, Doug, for coming on the podcast. We really enjoyed the conversation, and we're looking forward to having you on again soon.
Yeah, anytime, man. That's been great.
Perfect.
Sorry I spoke so much, but sometimes I get carried away. I get so excited about this stuff.
It was wonderful. Great conversation.
Okay. Cheers.
Uh,
Love it.